What do you like? Tell me what you like.
There's value in that because it almost gives the brain like a vacation, right?
Holistic health is completely underappreciated, but so critical.
Eating whole foods, and
the key is just to find something that you really enjoy.
Welcome to the NAMP Nourishing You podcast. I'm Kristen Burkett.
And I'm Diana Wally. We're your hosts for NAMP's podcast dedicated to connecting holistic health enthusiasts with each other to share practical information from the holistic wellness space for enhanced vitality.
Diana and I are master nutrition therapists, board certified in holistic nutrition with private practices and an online joint venture that supports clients and practitioners as they strive to reach their full potential. We're honored to be hosting this podcast for NAMP and connecting our listeners with the latest in holistic wellness.
And if you enjoyed today's show, help us out by commenting below, liking this video, and subscribing to the channel to help us spread the word.
This episode of the Nourishing You podcast is brought to you by NANP Platinum sponsor FDN, the Functional Diagnostic Nutrition Certification Course and Community. The purpose of FDN is to help people investigate and resolve the underlying causes and conditions at the root of their health complaints. When data from these labs are correctly interpreted along with other clues, the healing opportunities are revealed. FDN health detectives do not diagnose or treat any disease, nor do they practice medicine. Everything they do is science and evidence-based, using carefully chosen functional lab work and complete client history to investigate underlying malfunctions of the adrenal glands, mucosal barrier, detoxification systems, metabolic processes, absorption and assimilation, immune and defense mechanisms, and steroid hormone balance, to name a few. To learn more, visit functionaldiagnosticnutrition.com.
Mira Dessy, known as the Ingredient Guru, is a holistic nutrition educator, author, and public speaker. She teaches how to navigate the grocery store's mammoth packaged food stock, how to decipher confusing food labels, understand the relationship of food additives to poor health, and how to find real food. She's the author of the book, The Pantry Principle, How to Read the Label and Understand What's Really in Your Food. Mira received her holistic nutrition credentials from Bowman College, is a professional member of the National Association of Nutrition Professionals, and is on the board of directors for the American Holistic Health Association. Welcome, Mira. I just have to say thank you for your book. It was one of my first reference books early in my career, and I still refer to it often and recommend it quite frequently. It's just such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me here, and thank you for those kind words about my book. That truly was such a labor of love to create it.
You know, it's so great speaking with one of our own about a topic that always seems to nag at moms, caregivers, grandparents every fall. Your work is foundational for us at every age. So this episode is really for everyone, even those of us that don't have children at home. But to get us started, we'd love to hear a recap of your story and your on-ramp into the holistic field.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so fascinating to me because, like so many in our industry, I did not start out in holistic nutrition and wellness. I began my career prior to this was as a database administrator for an international research firm. And what happened is I became very ill. I wound up having an immune system collapse. I was diagnosed with 5 different autoimmune disorders. And in the course of, I would, now it's kind of funny. Back then it wasn't. I would joke that if there was an IST, I had it. Gastroenterologist, rheumatologist, cardiologist, like I had them all. And I was seeing so many people trying to get answers, not finding the solutions that I needed. And weirdly enough, it did not occur to me until I'd been doing this for a while that no one was talking to me about my food. And then one day, a friend of mine gave me a book that talked about artificial colors. And I went, what? And I began to go through my pantry. And you know, the interesting thing was, at the time, my friends would say to me, "Oh, you're one of the healthiest eaters I know," because we belonged to the farmers market and the CSA, and we would can, you know, all kinds of things, applesauce and pickles and everything else, but we still had junk in the house. And as I began to dive into my pantry and get rid of some of these things, I actually began to get healthier. And so I'd love to share with you that my primary diagnosis all those years ago was ulcerative colitis. And I just recently had a colonoscopy, and I was told that there is no more signs of ulcerative colitis in my system. So that is the power of nutrition.
Wow. That's an amazing story, Mira. And so once that happened, how did you take that further to get down into learning more
Oh,
and yeah, into the field?
yeah. You know, even now, all these years later, there's not a ton of information out there. So I began to study everything I could, find all the resources and references I could. And at a certain point, I turned to my husband and I said, I think I've taught myself everything I can. I have to go back to school. And I wound up choosing Bowman College, which I will forever be grateful for. It was a great school. I got a fabulous education there. And I became a nutrition educator. And the funny thing is, as I began to work on my own health journey, people around me began to see what was going on, and they would say, "Hey, like, can I talk to you? Can I ask you questions?" And that turned into a career. And from there, I then wound up writing my book and teaching more classes and then speaking. So it grew very organically. I promise you, it's kind of like in the movie business. They say there's no such thing as an overnight success. In the nutrition business, there's no such thing as an overnight appearance either.
Yeah. It just kind of gives me chills when I hear that you just got your recent scope back and everything was clear. That's just so amazing and so wonderful for you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think it's incredible how we continue to find a silver lining, but then how it can spread so much further than us individually as people like you find ways to share what you've learned. So thank you for grabbing onto that and deciding the world needed to know more about this versus just having it stay to your own personal journey.
Thank you. Well, and you know, the other thing that's so funny is in the beginning, I had a business where I was teaching people a lot of things, fermenting foods, soaking foods, learning how to use whole foods in their diet. And I didn't call myself the ingredient guru, but honestly, I love the food label and all the stupid stuff they do to our food. And so I am constantly doing research about that. And that's honestly part of what led to the book. And to this day, I still continue to do that through all the different ways that, you know, outreach through the newsletter, or if I'm speaking at a conference or whatever, just educating people, because we are so overwhelmed and so confused by the things that the manufacturers do to our food, and then the marketing that they put out is just so slick.
Yeah. And I will talk about resources when we get to the end of the episode today, but I have been on your email newsletter for years now. And it's just like every time I get it, I'm like, what has she got today? And I love how you break it down so that anybody who gets your newsletter can understand. It doesn't have to be a nutrition professional. You really write so that, you know, all of us can understand and know what to do with the information. So I love that.
Thank you.
So I know, like, every fall over the years, as my kids were in school or getting back to school, I always wrestled with how to feed them healthy, especially when I always felt in competition with all those tempting foods and candies they were constantly exposed to in school. So I know you have a lot of nitty gritty to offer our listeners. So let's just jump right in and start with breakfast. Why not, right? What pearls do you want to share with us, or how can you talk to us about breakfast and what we can start there?
Yeah, so breakfast is actually more of an issue than we realize, because so much of it is dependent on the kid. And you know, some kids, they're up and they're ready to go and they're ready for breakfast. Other kids, they're not. They're a little slower moving in the day. but we still have to get something into them that becomes part of the challenge, because if they go to school without breakfast, they are not going to do well. And I also am a firm believer, even for those schools that provide breakfast, the breakfast they provide at school tends to be high carb, high starch, high sugar. And so it's not a great choice. And one of the things that I really like to encourage families to do is to talk with your kid about what are the things that you like, and then trying to figure out ways that we can make sure that they're getting enough protein and none of the, or as little as possible of the things that we don't want them to have, like sugar and that sort of thing. So pancakes sounds like a yummy breakfast, but it's totally not. It will leave them so energy depleted, it's not even funny. And yet not every kid likes eggs, you know, so we have to really work with our kids and get their buy-in. One thing that I like encouraging families to do is during the summer, see if you can work with your kids to come up with like a 5-day menu of things that they like, either that they can help you make if they're old enough to be working in the kitchen, or just that these are things that they like. And then they have like a little menu and they can choose what they're in the mood for that day. But you know, all 5 options are good choices for them.
Could you could you go back and just touch on some of the basics that you said there, like related to like the protein and the sugars? Like, can we just kind of go back to the fundamentals?
Absolutely. So I firmly believe that every kid needs a good protein foundation at the beginning of the day. You know, when we get started in the morning, we've been in this state of metabolic rest, and then we're asking our body to get up and get going. Protein provides the foundation. Those amino acids do so many different wonderful things for our body in terms of fuel, in terms of brain chemistry, all of that. So if we have a good protein breakfast, we're going to be able to pay attention better. If we're having something like a bowl of cereal or pancakes or waffles, those kinds of things, those are starchy, carby things that will give the appearance of energy, but the body burns through that really, really quickly, and then there's nothing left. And then all of a sudden you have a kid who's potentially inattentive, grumpy, hungry, not feeling well. So we really need that good, solid protein foundation in the morning.
And so you mentioned eggs. You also said not all children like eggs. What are some other protein-rich breakfast ideas?
Well, one of my favorites is, and for some reason, in my experience, I used to work in a pediatrician's office. This one seems to appeal more to boys than girls, but that's okay. Meatballs for breakfast. I'm a huge fan. You know, make meatballs, and generally I like large meatballs for that. And so you give them 1 or 2 meatballs plus some veggies, and that can be a great start for the day. If you have a kid who's a reluctant eater, just they're not hungry in the morning, because some kids aren't, I am not opposed to a protein shake to get them started, but it has to be a really good quality, clean protein shake that doesn't have negative ingredients in it like artificial sweetener. Like, please don't give your kid a Boost and think you're doing them a favor.
So some of the powdered proteins that you can find, a whey protein isolate or something like that, that you could find at a health food store.
At a health food store, those can be good. And for some kids, one of the things you can do also is, if you have a good quality vanilla protein powder, you can mix it into a bowl of oatmeal. So maybe they want the oatmeal, they want something like that, but having the protein powder gets a little bit of protein into them to get them started.
What about yogurt? Oh, sorry, Kristen.
No, that's okay.
One more question.
I was just thinking we could mix that protein powder in the pancakes too. If like you've got a kid that you're trying to wean off of the pancakes, or, you know, transition away from, that could be helpful.
So you can. One of the biggest challenges I have with pancakes and waffles, though, and trust me, I used to do this as a kid. My kids used to do this before I became the ingredient guru. Those two are nothing more than delivery systems for maple syrup.
No, that's true.
So it's like a lot of syrup and a little pancake on the plate.
I always think of Elf, you know, when you put like maple syrup on, pasta and maple syrup on
everything. I know.
What about Greek yogurt, like a high protein yogurt? What are your thoughts about that?
I think that can be a really great choice as well. And one of the nice things about a Greek yogurt is that it's got a nice tangy flavor to it, and it's kind of thick. So kids enjoy that. And you can take some fresh fruit, mash that up, and put that on top. I'm not a fan of the flavored ones because those have too much sugar in them, but a little mashed fruit on top can be a really great thing.
Right. So we want to go for the plain Greek yogurt.
Yes.
Right? Versus
Yes.
anything, even the vanilla. I know some people think that vanilla doesn't have anything added, but that vanilla flavoring can sometimes be more sugar than the fruit flavored ones, I've noticed. So.
It just depends on how much they put in. And so I'd also like to, for anybody who's listening who's not aware of this, dairy products have sugar in them. They have lactose, which is the milk sugar. So please don't sit there feeling frustrated as you're looking at the labels in the grocery store going, this one has 9 grams of, protein per, or 9 grams of sugar per cup. I don't think it's that high actually, but however many it is, it's going to have sugar. But if you get the plain, you're getting milk sugar, not added sugar. So that's a big difference.
Right. And, another thing you mentioned, which I think is something, the earlier you can start with your kiddos, the better, but trying to get them to be comfortable with the more savory things for breakfast versus the sweet. And sometimes that's a transition. So I like the meatball idea. I know trying to get kids to eat vegetables with breakfast can be pretty challenging. Do you have any tricks or tips for that?
My biggest solution for vegetables, depending on what you're making, is to see if we can puree them and add them to things. For example, I'm a huge fan when I make meatballs of throwing extra things in there. So that can be a really great choice. If you're making an omelet or a frittata, obviously you can get some veggies in there. If you're making a smoothie or some kind of a yogurt bowl, then you can, for certain things, try and put in some of the milder veggies. For example, frozen zucchini is a great choice in a smoothie. You won't taste it, and it gives it a nice thick consistency. You can also put some greens in there. And so if you were to make like a yogurt, if you were going to make a yogurt bowl, you could try taking some of the milder veggies, like maybe a tiny bit of sweet potato or something like that, and blending it together and then putting it in a bowl with some mashed fruit on top, and see if they'll try that.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I think trying to sneak those veggies in, that's one to start doing early if you can, but I think you gave us some good tips to even do that as they get a little older.
I'm also a fan of total transparency with the kids. So if they say to you, is there a vegetable in here? The answer is yes, there is. Isn't it delicious? Because we don't want to lie to them. We don't want to sneak. Like, I really dislike the word sneak. It's like, we're just trying to get it into them and do it in a way that they will enjoy. But we're not trying to lie to our kids. And so if they ask, you tell them. And if they go, well, I don't want that, then the next step is to invite them to be in the kitchen with you. Say, well, let's figure out a way that you would like it. Because once they hit like first grade, I feel like kids should be invited into the kitchen. I mean, even the little smaller than that can be invited in. But when it comes to cooking for themselves or learning how to do that, once you get to first grade, you're old enough to start to learn how to use certain kitchen utensils, put on an apron. I mean, my grandson comes over to visit and he loves it because he has his own apron and we play in the kitchen together. He's learning how to use measuring tools and everything else.
Right. And you probably know if this is correct or not, but I believe I heard from Robert Lustig, who's a pediatric endocrinologist, kind of well-known, authored some books, who said that it takes a child an average of 13 times to like a savory food when they try it. And I believe that was the right number, but all that to say, to keep trying, don't give up. If your child doesn't care for something the first time they try it, a savory food, just keep trying.
Absolutely. And when I worked in the pediatrician's office, our rule was that it was more like 20 times.
Okay.
And we have to remember that every exposure counts, because for some kids, just looking at something on a plate can send them into hysterics. And so we want them to just be comfortable. Look, you don't have to eat it, just look at it. And then once it's been there for a while, would you like to touch it? Getting them to touch things. And then maybe their next exposure is they're just going to touch it to their tongue. You don't have to eat it. You just have to touch it to your tongue. And then can you hold it in your mouth? Can you take a bite? If you don't like it, you are allowed to politely spit it out. But we find ways to get them used to that. And then the other thing that we do is we also, if there are foods that they like, we look for lateral foods. So if you like carrots, then we look for other things. What is it that you like about carrots? Is it the color? Is it the crunch? Is it or do you only like carrots when they're cooked? Finding ways to include that. And then I also believe that kids are actually pretty curious about being in the kitchen. So if you let them in, yes, they make more of a mess. Yes, it takes longer, but chances are they're going to be more engaged with their food.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important to do that early because I don't know, I've found, Diana, maybe you have too, and I'm sure Mira, you've seen this, that we've got a couple of generations now of kids that were allowed to be excused from eating what the parents were eating. And so they're now young adults eating chicken nuggets and mac and cheese as their primary food source. And they don't know how to cook. They don't like anything else. And that's a reflection of what exposures they had when they were younger. And then it gets harder and harder to change that palate.
And unfortunately, I lay a lot of the blame for that on the food producers because for them, the ability to market to these kids and convince them that where did kid food come from? We go back, millennia. Kids ate what the parents ate. Mom mulched it up for them because they didn't have teeth and then spit it out and fed it to them. And that was how they learned how to eat food. Now, granted, most of us don't chew our food or don't chew the food for our children anymore. But I don't understand why there should be a different kid meal. Why should they have different food? I also don't understand, why do children not eat with the parents anymore? I know there are a lot of families where children have dinner time at a certain time and the parents eat later. The parents may sit with their kids, but they're not eating with them. And we're not learning that eating is this communal pleasure. We should be together and enjoy this time and this sharing.
Yeah. And even seeing that mom and dad like something sometimes encourages them to want to like it too, because they want to be like their parents in a lot of ways. So yeah, so many benefits from that.
Absolutely. And then I think one of the other things when it comes to the first meal of the day for kids, if you can create some kind of a menu with your kid of the things that they like, it helps them feel like they have more, authority, autonomy over their food. So they're the ones that get to make a choice. So if they have a little menu, it's kind of fun for them to go, today we'll have, eggs, and tomorrow we'll have meatballs, or maybe we're going to have, beans and bacon. I don't know. Like, there are so many different, I think that's the other thing. We have to learn to think outside the box. There are so many different food cultures that we can look at and how they feed their kids. For some reason, America seems to be uniquely geared towards a cereal box.
Well, that's what the exposure is, right, on TV. That's what you feed your kids. That's what you're told over and over again, to eat a certain cereal. So I'm curious, we mentioned this, you did a little while ago, but there seems to be more of a trend of kids skipping breakfast, especially teens. And so what are your thoughts here? Is there an age at which you feel like, the whole intermittent fasting thing, which is popular on TikTok and all of that, like, when does this start to apply to kids or young adults? Your thoughts there?
Sure. So I want to start by saying I certainly understand intermittent fasting and that it can be valuable. I don't think it's a good idea for kids. So I would really say, even in high school, I don't know that it's a really good idea. They have such high metabolisms and such high metabolic need that for them to do that, instead of learning how to eat intuitively when they're hungry, choosing real food is not a good choice. And I also think part of the challenge is, unfortunately, once we get to upper middle school and high school ages, there tends to be the potential for them to use intermittent fasting as an excuse. And really what it is they have concerns about body image and other things. So that's where you then need to find a holistic professional, a pediatrician, a nurse, somebody who is well versed in adolescent nutrition in order to make sure that they're getting the nutrition and the resources that their body actually needs.
Yeah, good point. So before we move on to lunch, would you please touch on hydration, the importance of hydration? You know, I know that when my children were in school, in grade school, high school, that they would say often that it was difficult to drink during school. Whether it's carrying a water bottle, access to a water fountain, and then you have to go to the restroom and you can't leave class. All of these different issues. So, how do you get around that? Because we know how important hydration is.
And I'm so glad that you brought that up. It's so interesting. I just recently had a conversation with someone about this, and she's a teacher, and she was talking about the fact that schools are now actually allowing children to bring water bottles into the classroom, because previously they weren't allowed to. So if you were thirsty, you had however many minutes between classes. And if you were little, you probably had less than the bigger kids to go get a drink at the water fountain. And everybody's lined up behind you. So it's not like you can really drink your fill. And then the other thing is that for so many kids, because their day is so packed, they just get to this point where they don't learn to recognize the signals that their body's telling them that they're dehydrated. And so we see more headaches and more other issues that come along with being dehydrated, fatigue, etc. So the ability to have water in the classroom is good. Hopefully that, I did not think to ask her, but hopefully that comes along with restroom permission as well. But hydration is just as, if not more important for them than it is for the adults.
Yeah, so good. All right, so now, as promised, we'll move on to the dreaded lunch question. So what can we do to have our kids actually eat their lunch versus throwing it away or trading it for something, that looks better? And I know that this was something, Kristen, you were probably in the same boat, that I would think about that, I'm going to bed the night before. I'm like, okay, how can I create the bento boxes to look Instagram worthy and, all of the things. So yeah, what advice do you have around healthy lunches? This is a big one.
This is a big one. And I will share that I firmly believe on average, the healthiest lunch is probably one that your child brings from home, because unfortunately, most of the school cafeterias have been taken over by companies like Cisco and Aramark and that kind of thing. And those companies have a very tiny, tiny budget. They get so many federal dollars to spend. And so they're going to devolve to cheap food. Some schools at the higher levels, actually, at least in the community I live in, they have made deals with local fast food restaurants to be present in the high school. So kids can go into school and buy Chick-fil-A for lunch, which I think is horrible. So I think getting your kid to be willing to bring their own lunch is certainly something. Making it as delicious as possible, getting their buy-in. Again, finding out what are the things you like. Unfortunately, looking back, when my kids were little, I was the one who decided what they had for lunch. And it was like, eat it or lump it. Like, this is what I'm sending you with. And I realize now in hindsight that I should have asked them for input. And even more than that, I should have asked them to help me make their lunches the night before. Because if kids make food, chances are they're more invested in eating it because they know what's there. They're comfortable with it. And so I think that's a really good option, is to make that part of the after dinner routine. We clean up the table, put away the food, do the dishes, and then we make lunch for tomorrow. And that also then becomes a really good habit for the adults too, because it's not only kids who struggle with lunch. A lot of adults don't bring a lunch with them, and then they're shaking down the nearest candy bar machine or they're running for fast food. But if you're making lunch for your kids, hopefully you're setting a good example and doing well by yourself by making a lunch for yourself as well. And that over time is going to help your kids have healthy habits once they're no longer living at home.
That's so good. And you think about it, if you're putting all of dinner away, it's super easy to put that in a container to take for lunch the next day, right? So you just use those leftovers and you're not making something else.
Exactly.
And so, or maybe part of it goes with the lunch, but
Mhm.
it's real easy to just have it right there and use that as a base for.
It is. And one of the things that's so fabulous is now they have so many clever lunchbox systems. So you can have like a little thing of chili and another thing that's got a salad in it or some veggie sticks with hummus or whatever. Like you can put all these little pieces and parts together to make a great lunch. And obviously they just had it for dinner. They know they like it. So it's familiar and comfortable and it's easy to make.
Right. And so I'm assuming that emphasis on protein is the same.
Mm-hmm.
Trying not to put the sugar in, maybe an actual piece of fruit instead of a fruit leather or a fruit roll up or something like that. Just getting that real food in that lunchbox.
And one of the things that I really also want to encourage for kids when you're having lunch is to figure out what's a good way to get the protein into them, because that's going to help sustain them throughout the day, but also vegetables. We need something crunchy, or we need something that's got all those fabulous antioxidants and phytonutrients and flavonoids and all those wonderful things. And those come in all of our colorful food. So with the younger kids, this tends to work. With the older ones, not so much. You can have a little rainbow chart and see how far through the rainbow, how many servings of the rainbow can you get in a school week, and see how the children respond to that. But sometimes they like it because they'll be like, oh, I haven't had anything blue. We need blue food. Or, I haven't had any yellows. What can we do that's yellow? And so kids kind of like that, the little ones at least. But again, we're creating healthy habits. And so if you're used to doing that when you're in first grade, second grade, third grade, by the time you get to seventh or eighth grade, you're like, man, I need some color in my diet.
That's
right. Yeah. Chick-fil-A is very beige.
Yes,
Yeah,
it is.
Well, I hope you'll indulge us in a little bit of a selfish personal question, but I hope there's probably many people in the audience that this would help as well. So looking for ideas on how to guide older children, so those going to college, whether they're in a dining hall or an apartment setting, it can be difficult to take time for lunch with a busy schedule, but I'm assuming, for a college student, skipping lunch is going to lead to bonking in the afternoon because of, how much energy the brain uses, and then maybe binging later in the day on junk foods and that sort of thing. What are your thoughts there?
So one of the things that I think, and it depends on, so many colleges have different setups. So it depends on what the setup is for your kid. And I am a huge fan of trying to, if your kid is not on a meal plan, because if you're on a meal plan at the university, you usually pretty much just stick with that. So you're getting whatever you have available at the cafeteria, and that's a matter of teaching them how to make better choices. Like, we don't eat pasta 5 days a week. We look for some veggies in the diet. We have some fresh fruit, that kind of thing. If you have a child who is not on a meal plan, who is in like independent housing or has some sort of a flexible plan, then it's a matter of figuring out what is the best way to get food to them. And for that, I think one of the most fabulous things that has ever been invented is something like Instacart, or some of the delivery services, because then you can work with your kid to figure out what will they consume, and you help get it to them so it's already there. For college kids, I think the biggest challenge, it has to be convenient, it has to be fast, and it has to be easy. And unfortunately, that's why, junk food usually wins.
Right. I think that's another area where whoever's cooking, whether it's a parent or a kid in an apartment, if they can cook extra when they cook so that they've got those leftovers, then then they don't have to reach for those other things quite as quickly. And then the other thing I've found helpful, at least At least I feel like it's worked with my son in college. We'll see if it works with my daughter going off this fall. I don't know. But we've talked about pick your protein first and then
Mhm.
build 3 colors around it. And if you can do that, you've got a pretty good plate, at least to start with. Then you can add some pasta or some of these other things that, don't add as many of those nutrients. But anyway, what do you think about that? Or do you have any
So I
spin
think
off of that?
that's actually a really great idea, because if they start with their protein, that means we also have to teach them how much is a proper size serving of protein, because we're so used to going to a restaurant and they bring out a 12-ounce steak. Well, that's enough for 3 people. That is not a serving. So teaching them what an appropriate serving size is, and then teaching them to make it colorful, is a great choice. And like I said, so I did not do this with my kids because it wasn't available back then, but I know for some of my clients, having the ability to say, all right, let's build a menu plan and we'll have groceries delivered. Or, if they do some of the food boxes, that comes with instructions. Most of those meals only take 30 minutes. And it is my experience that for a lot of adolescents, for some reason, leftovers is not really a thing. Like when they're in college, they're not thrilled about leftovers. They either want food or like fresh food or fast food.
Yeah. And if they have access to a car, this just dawned on me. So my older daughter is in an apartment that she shares with 3 other women, and they go to Costco, which I mean, I don't think there was such a thing when I was in college. That was a long time ago, but they go to Costco, and I was asking her the other day what she gets. She's like, oh, we get the eggs, and we get a big thing of mixed greens, salad and fruit and that sort of thing, so that they only have to go once a week, and then they buy in bulk. And so I thought that was really interesting and a really good idea if they have access to a car.
And the other thing that's great about that is she's obviously learned how to have a menu where you're incorporating these different things, so you know what you're getting, and for some kids, it just depends on where you're going to school as to what you have access to. But even to start when you're in high school, taking them to the grocery store with you, which admittedly is sometimes an exercise in frustration. But if they learn how to be comfortable in that setting and how to make decisions, instead of, like, I know one person told me that her son, his grocery shopping method was, okay, the fastest checkout lane is 10 items or less. So he would just buy 10 things. And if he needed more than that, it was too bad. Like, he was only getting 10 things because he was going through that 10 checkout lane, And so just teaching them how to be comfortable with that. And I love that your daughter and her roommates are buying like the big thing of salad, because that means they're sharing that. Same thing with the eggs or some of the other things that they buy there. But when you can take advantage of something like that, or even just going to the grocery store and having that fresh food on hand, you're more likely to eat it and, you also learn to enjoy it more. And again, it's about learning how to be comfortable in the kitchen, at the grocery store, in that having to fend for yourself modality. I think one of the best things we can do is spend time with our kids and teach them how to be comfortable in those settings, because if we do that, they feel more empowered. When they feel overwhelmed, I think they're more likely to go, I'll just go let somebody else cook for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said earlier about what to do with the younger kids for breakfast, like create a menu, create 5 things that they like, and build off of that and rotate that. Similar thing applies to kids that are cooking for themselves later, like in college, is what are your favorite 5 meals, or what are 5 meals that would be easy to make? Let's make sure you've got, the 3-step recipe for that. Take that with you so that you've already got a grocery list and recipes, and okay, today I can make, X, tomorrow I can, or
Right.
whatever, but you've got something to start from and you're not having to figure it all out.
Exactly. And the other thing that's so wonderful about that, we have to remember at every step along this pathway, starting when they're little, going into those elementary and then middle and then high school and then college years, that everybody thinks about feeding them where they are right now, and that's fabulous. We definitely want to nourish them. We want them to have good quality, clean protein. We want them to get a varied, colorful, nutrient-dense diet. But the end goal is to help them so that when they're independently launched into the world, they continue to do that. We're not trying to not raise kids who at 30 years old still eat, like you said, chicken nuggets and mac and cheese.
Yeah. So what about the whole snacking area? Are snacks necessary, and like at what ages? And maybe let's talk about some healthy snacks for a minute.
Sure. So I believe in general, if we are well nourished, chances are we don't really need snacking, except little kids probably do need snacking because, one day they'll eat like a linebacker, the next day they eat nothing. I mean, they tend to fluctuate. And so for them, sometimes grazing is just because they're responding to their body. That's fabulous. If you have a kid who is an athlete and they're putting out tons of energy, they may be burning through their body's fuel stores faster. So yes, a snack is certainly appropriate for them. I'm a huge fan of whatever you do for a snack, just like every other meal, we got to have some protein there. So I love nuts, especially raw soaked nuts for a snack. I also think, and it's never too early to introduce your kids to sardines. I mean, seriously, they're a great snack. They're rich in protein, good source of calcium. Like they're great for you. We don't tend to eat them as much as we should, but they are a good source. And then also making sure that they have, especially if they're, an athlete and possibly running around a lot, hydrating foods are a good choice. So, peppers and cucumbers and even some of the juicier fruits like watermelon and things like that. You can cut things into finger size and make it a good choice for them.
Very good. All right. Anything else you think we should be thinking about for lunch and snacks before we move on?
I think with lunch, there's one thing that I really want to encourage people to think about, and that is how we can get away from using so much bread. Because for a lot of people, lunch means a sandwich, and that comes slapped between two slices of bread. And I really want to encourage you to think outside the box when it comes to that. So one of my favorite things to do, if you take a bell pepper and you cut it in half and you clean it up, you can stack a whole bunch of stuff in there and make sort of like a mini Dagwood that's very crunchy on the outside. You can use a lettuce wrap. You can, if you're someone who does grains, you can do a rice paper wrap. Like there are lots of ways to make something sandwich-like that does not require bread.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. I even see that with adults, especially, adults that, they're taking their lunch with them, but trying to get to a healthier version of a lunch. It's a little bit more blood sugar stabilizing, right? With just a little bit more protein in there. And one piece of deli meat on 2 pieces of bread is not going to cut it.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Very good. It's a great idea. So we know that you're big on setting the tone for overall health with a positivity practice. Can you tell us more about that and your thoughts there?
Absolutely. So I, obviously am a big believer in holistic health and wellness. And holistic means looking at the whole body. We are whole body systems. We are not just what we eat or how we sleep or, we don't break down into individual parts. We are what we eat, think, drink, and do. And so we need to look at all of that. And I think a positivity practice falls into a couple of different places throughout the day as a basic practice. And if we can teach our kids to do that, even better. And so the 3 places that I really like to encourage people to add some sort of mindful awareness or positivity to their day is at the beginning of the day. We wake up and we say hello to the day. We're grateful to be here. Some people do gratitude journaling. For people who say, I don't know what to do, one of my favorite things to do, I encourage them after you've brushed your teeth, stand there with your hands in a heart on your tummy, put your hand over your tummy and just think about or say out loud some of the things that you're happy for. I actually do a little happy dance in the mornings. I think it's also really important to do that at the end of the day, to say what you're grateful for. Because no matter how overwhelming your day may have been, chances are there's something that you can be grateful for, even if it's just like, oh, I love my bed. I'm glad I'm going to bed. And sometimes there are days that are really hard and really overwhelming because sad things happen. But if we try to make it a practice to greet the beginning and end of each day with gratitude, I feel like that makes us happier. And it also helps to activate our parasympathetic nervous system more, which many of us are very low on. And then the third place that I really think we need to do that is at the beginning of every meal. I like to start each meal by cupping my hands around my plate, and I say a gratitude for everyone who planted, tended, nurtured, harvested, transported, or had anything to do with that food, because all those lives have given their life force, their time, to help that food get onto my plate so that I can eat. And I am deeply grateful for that. And when we do that, again, we activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which helps to make digestion better.
Just you talking about that, I felt my nervous system shift, that's so beautiful.
It is. And I think we forget what it takes to get food on our plate. We're so out of touch with that anymore because we're just so used to being. I'm always amazed. I go in the grocery store. One store has so much abundance of food, multiplied by that, across all the grocery stores in town and in the state and in the country and whatever. Think of how much effort it takes to get food to our table, versus just thinking there's just plethora everywhere. I think that's
Absolutely.
really good.
And even things that are not whole foods still deserve to be, blessed, and we deserve to be grateful for them because, I'm like everybody else. I mean, I like a cookie every now and then, or, I'll have some sort of a snack, a pretzel or something. All the people that somebody had to grow that wheat, and then somebody had to harvest it, and then it had to get to where it was going, and then all those people had to put it together, and they had to package it, and then they had to drive it to the grocery store, and somebody had to stock it, and then somebody had to help me check out. Like all those people, and it's tiny micro fragments, but it adds up to I'm able to do the work that I do and to enjoy the other things in my life aside from work, time with friends and family, knitting, reading, whatever, gardening, all those things. I have the time to do those because these other people have helped to create the food that shows up on my plate.
Very true.
That's beautiful. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So, you touched on that gratitude practice,
Today on the
and we've
Nourishing
talked a
You
lot about
podcast.
how to nourish young people. Is there something that you could share with the moms, the dads, the caregivers, the grandparents that are watching, maybe about how you incorporate some of this into your own life?
Absolutely. I love that you asked that. One thing that I think is so important is we have to remember that we are building a relationship with food, not only for ourselves and what we do, but once we have children and grandchildren, we are helping them build a relationship with food. And unfortunately, many of us have lost touch with how to eat intuitively. And so when we work on improving our relationship with food and we help those we love do the same thing, we are creating stronger, healthier people. And so for me, one of the things that's so important is if you don't love something to eat, don't try to feed it to somebody else, because they'll know. And, it's terrible when parents go, oh, I got to feed my kid peas. Don't do that to your child. If you don't like peas, don't feed them peas. Hopefully there's somebody else in their life who likes peas who can feed that to them. And then also opening up that conversation about how do you feel when you eat certain foods? Like, how does food make you feel? You feel happy? Do you feel energized? How do you feel when you're hungry? How do you feel when you're sad? How do you feel when you're overwhelmed? Because I have a class that I teach on mindful eating. And one of the things that I point out to people is we are all, every single human on the face of this planet, we are all emotional eaters. Because when we were born and our belly hurt, somebody put something in our mouth that made it feel better. And that created a connection in our brain. Unfortunately, as we grow up, we don't remember to connect that, oh man, I'm feeling this way. I need something to crunch, or I need something salty, or I need something sweet, or whatever your go-to is, because I'm unhappy, or I'm mad, or I'm overwhelmed, or I'm happy. And so happy means cake and ice cream. Like we forget to examine how we're eating. And then as we learn to build those connections, we also learn that when we're nourished, and we're not just feeding ourselves, when we're nourishing ourselves, we don't tend to have cravings for junk. We don't tend to snack all day long. We tend to be more in control of how we are actually providing for ourselves and our body.
That's powerful. I mean, I think you just hit the nail right on my head with just our fast-paced culture and our lack of connection between our bodies and our food, and why we eat, why we choose what we eat, and just getting back to those basics of being in touch with that, how powerful that can be.
You know, there's a really great, thank you so much. There's a really great quote that I love by Liz Lipsky, who is, of course, the goddess of digestive wellness. And she says, we often fuel our bodies the way we fuel our cars. Stop, gas, go. That needs to change. And she's so right. You know, we, like you said, we are in this fast-paced world, and we somehow, food producers have misled us into thinking we just need to woof it down and go, and like they've done all the work for us and we'll be fine. No, that's not what nourishing is about. And when we learn to slow down, we learn to really connect, it helps us on so many different levels.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And we're going to get ready to wrap up here. Would you like to share some of the resources that you have available that our listeners might be interested in?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for asking. So I'm known as the Ingredient Guru. Obviously, I can be found all over the internet. Like, you can go to my website. I'm on Instagram at theingredientguru.com, all those things. I do also have my book, The Pantry Principle, How to Read the Label and Understand What's Really in Your Food. And so for people who are learning how to read the label, how to begin to really understand what they're eating, that's a fabulous resource. And then the other thing I have is a wonderful, wonderful community called The Kitchen Table. And this is where you have all of my programs. So we have the Preparedness Pantry Principle, the 21-Day Nutrition Reset. I have my Healthy Readers Book Club, a lot of ebooks, and several calls a month with me. And that's all in one beautiful community. You can find that at miraskitchentable.com.
Oh, that's a lot. That'll keep us all busy. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm just really touched that you would invite me.
Oh, thank you for coming. And we know we promised to get you going. So we really, really appreciate it, and would love to have you back sometime. And also to our listeners, thank you so much for sharing your valuable time by joining us. We appreciate you, and we can't wait to see you next time. Take care.
If you'd like to access other episodes or subscribe so you don't miss a beat, you can find us at nanp.org/NANP-podcast.
Membership in the NANP provides you with a competitive advantage. Whether you're a current practitioner or a student, we want you to become an active, informed leader of the holistic nutrition community and join today at nanp.org. NANP is very proud to provide the highest level of professional recognition and validation in the holistic nutrition industry through the board certification in holistic nutrition credential. To earn this valuable designation, candidates must demonstrate an exceptional level of knowledge and understanding of holistic nutrition by passing a board exam and documenting client contact hours. Are you ready to boost your credibility with board certification? Visit NAMP.org today to apply.
Keep in mind that the information on the NAMP podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical or legal advice. The NAMP is not liable or responsible for any harm, damage, or illness arising from the use of the information contained herein. By listening to the information on this podcast, you agree to defend, indemnify, and hold harmless the NAMP and all agents. Copyright NAMP, all rights reserved.